Racist woman refuses to let a black general sit in first class, then cries in fear. If you're new to this channel, I invite you to click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any amazing new stories here. Nicole was a tall, beautiful white woman. She seemed to carry a lot of worries, but she also showed a lot of confidence, almost as if she thought she was better than the others. He walked quickly and carefully. It seemed that every second of his life was measured to be perfect. She wore clothes from famous brands, well cut, and her expensive shoes made a noise on the smooth floor of the departure lounge. William, on the other hand, was a black man. He stood firmly and followed the rules with discipline. This was the result of many years of training in the army. He carried within him the weight of many fights he had won, both in wars and in life. Her eyes showed the strength of someone who had worked hard for every achievement, every promotion and every award. He was an army general. This is a position that few people ever achieve. At that moment, he was about to take a first-class flight to Switzerland. He was going to enjoy his well-deserved vacation. She wore simple clothes, but her presence was strong. There was no need to say that out loud. The meeting took place in the cramped aisle of first class. Fate, which can be unfair, brought Nicole and William face to face. As Nicole approached her seat, she saw William sitting on one of the comfortable leather seats. He looked calm, as if he had found a moment of tranquility. But to Nicole, this seemed like a big mistake. How could a black man, even if he was dressed beautifully and looked safe, be sitting there in a place that in her mind was only for people like her? Her blood was very hot inside, and her face soon took on a look of disapproval. Nicole suddenly stopped in front of William. Her eyes looked him up and down, as if she wanted to know how he had gotten to this place. The question came out of her mouth almost automatically, but full of spite. "Why are you here?" William, who was used to dealing with challenges, looked up and met her gaze. He understood very well what those words meant. It wasn't just a question of whether you were sitting there. It was a question about his presence in that special place where, in Nicole's opinion, he didn't belong. The air around them became thick. A sense of tension hung in the air, and only the two of them realized it at that moment. "I'm where I'm supposed to be. This is where I belong," said William, in a firm, calm voice, but with a way that showed he wasn't afraid. Nicole crossed her arms. She was getting angrier by the second. This wasn't about a place to sit. It was about power, status, and being better than others. In his mind, there was a clear difference between us and them. William, no matter how successful he was still one of them. "People like you shouldn't be here." He said these words coldly, like a knife cutting through the air. William, who had been through many struggles, both physical and mental, felt Nicole's words in a different way. He, a man who had earned his place with many years of work and effort, was being judged by the color of his skin, by a woman who knew nothing about him. But at that moment, William decided to carry on the way he was. He wasn't going to bend to prejudice. He wouldn't let Nicole's lack of knowledge make him lose his dignity. He took a long breath, looking right at her. "Respect me," he said, in a more serious voice which echoed down the aisle of the plane. His eyes, which had once been calm, now showed the confidence of someone who understood what was at stake. The looks they exchanged were strong and full of unspoken meaning. Nicole, however, was not a person who gave in to a fight. This was especially the case when she felt better than the others. She took a step forward and walked towards William. Her breathing was heavy. Her eyes were fixed. In a fit of rage, she gave him a hard shove, throwing him back against the seat. The blow, which came by surprise, made William lose his balance for a moment. But he adjusted soon after. The people around him, who until then had been watching the scene curiously, began to react. They murmured to each other. Some even stood up to get a better look. What had started out as a very intense conversation was soon turning into a fight. It was getting dangerous. Nicole, out of control, started punching William's chest. Her fists were clenched, and she was trying to hit the one who, in her mind, was a threat to her world. Her hands shook as she hit him. She was so angry that she couldn't even understand it properly. William was surprised by the force of the aggression. He understood that he could no longer be patient. He, a general prepared to face difficult situations, knew that in normal times he would never assault a woman. But Nicole had crossed a line. He needed to defend himself. He wanted to protect his body. He also wanted to show that he would no longer accept this humiliation. With precise movements, William grabbed Nicole's wrists and pinned her down with the skill of an experienced soldier. He didn't hurt her, but his strength and control were enough to stop the attack. Nicole tried to free herself, but it was clear that the force was different. She was breathing hard, and fear began to take over her body. The aisle of the plane was very busy now. Passengers stood up and shouted to the flight attendants. They called for help. Some people were recording the scene with their cell phones. Others just watched, not understanding what to do. "This can't be," a woman shouted from somewhere on the plane, while another passenger asked for security. The people at the time were very aware of the situation. A black man, even though he was a general, was holding a white woman. For them, this was not acceptable. The flight attendants came running. They were with airport security guards who were quickly called. What they saw only made matters worse. Nicole, who was breathing rapidly and afraid, was held tightly by William. He had a serious face but was preparing to deal with what was going to happen next. Before he could tell her what had happened, the security guards grabbed William. The instructions were given quickly and clearly. He was to be taken off the plane and accused of hitting someone. The flight, which had not yet boarded, was about to be canceled. Nicole saw how things were going and began to exaggerate the situation. She cried and made a fool of herself. She stood small in the corridor. She was holding her knees and crying a lot. This made William feel even more the injustice he was experiencing at that moment. He who had protected himself from physical attack and offense was now being seen as the only one responsible. As William left the plane, the lights in the departure terminal illuminated the situation intensely. Nicole, meanwhile, stayed inside the plane and continued to play the victim. With her makeup smeared with the tears she had made herself, she hugged her arms. She tried to appear weak and sensitive to the pitying looks of the other passengers. Her short breaths and dramatic sobs filled the room, while the flight attendants tried to calm her down. "I'm sorry, but I haven't received a complete text to paraphrase. Please provide a longer excerpt or more information." "He attacked me," Nicole said quietly, her voice shaking. Meanwhile, people were looking disapprovingly at William. He was out of the plane and couldn't understand what was happening. There was no more room for what he had to say, for what he thought had happened. Nicole and the passengers took up the whole story. They had no doubts and chose her side. Outside, William was placed on the floor. His back was pressed firmly against the airport tarmac. The security guards looked at his documents. He tried to stay calm, but the feeling of shame was too strong. The injustice that he had always known was there, but had often faced in less direct ways, was now hitting him hard and without forgiveness. "Lift me up. I'm an army general. I want respect," William said, trying to overcome the prejudice around him. But his words seemed to get lost in a hole of lack of interest. One of the security guards, an older man with a slight country accent, looked at William with contempt. "General or not, you hit a woman here. We don't accept that kind of attitude." He shook his head. His eyes showed disapproval as he held William's wrists tighter in the handcuffs. The flight was canceled. The discontent inside the plane spread to the terminal. People were talking about what had happened. Even though some had seen the beginning of the fight, almost everyone already knew who was responsible. In a world where misconceptions are stronger than the truth, William was found guilty before he had a chance to defend himself. At the police station a few hours later, Nicole and William were taken to give their statement. The place was very cold. This was because the temperature was low and also because of the cold way the officers behaved towards them. Nicole, who acted like a victim, was given tissues and water. William, on the other hand, was restrained with handcuffs and watched suspiciously. When it came time for Nicole to speak, she expressed herself well. She changed the facts very skillfully. She showed herself as a defenseless woman who only reacted when she was harassed and attacked by a man who, according to her, didn't respect her. Her speech, full of lies, was supported by an emotional way of speaking. The crying, the dramatic pauses, and the way he used her fragility enchanted the audience. She knew how to use the perception of the people around her like someone moving the pieces of a game. "He scared me. I asked him to respect my space, but he was aggressive. I felt very scared," Nicole cried while the people from the government nodded. William then waited for his turn to talk. When he was able to tell what had happened, his story was clear and straightforward, with no exaggerations like Nicole's. He said that she had attacked him first. He said that she attacked him first. He said he only tried to defend himself. He also said that from the beginning, everything had to do with the racial prejudice she showed. He reported that he is a general in the army. He also said that he would never act aggressively if it wasn't to protect himself. But William's words seemed to go unheard. The authorities didn't show the same understanding as Nicole. For these people, William was just another black man who was in a problem that, for them, had already been solved. He had a trial that no one could see. The decision was already made before he even said anything. "The people who saw what happened say the same thing as Mrs. Nicole," said the police officer in charge, while looking coldly at William. There were many people who saw it. The plane was packed, but none of the passengers wanted to help William. No one saw him as the person who had suffered. For the people who saw what happened, a black man shouting at a white woman was what decided what would happen to him. William looked around. He saw that the place was changing. The atmosphere looked like a courtroom that doesn't do justice. He, who had spent his life defending the country and its laws, was now a victim of a system that wouldn't help him. The judge, who also didn't care and was influenced by the same prejudice as the witnesses, showed no understanding or questioning when passing sentence. He had to pay a fine of $70,000 and was unable to do his military activities for 6 months. The judge's words were striking and clear. William felt a pressure in his throat, but he stood firm. He would not show weakness at that moment. Even if he was feeling sick inside, he wouldn't let it show. $70,000, 6 months without being able to do anything. More than the loss of money, it was the loss of something much more important, the sense of justice and dignity that he was so proud of. William left the police station without saying a word, but he felt a great storm of emotions inside him. With every step he took, the sound seemed to return in the empty streets. His head was full of thoughts, and he reflected on what had just happened. He felt cheated by the system he had promised to defend. That system was supposed to bring justice, but in the end it failed to do so. $70,000, 6 months without being able to participate. It wasn't just the money or the time away from the army that hurt him. What happened was that, even though he was a general and had spent many years of his life serving his country, he was treated as if his life didn't have that much value. It was as if his work and his victories were worthless because of the color of his skin. Nicole had used prejudice to her advantage. Everyone else, from the people who saw it to the judge, helped make her a villain for the law. She won't get off scot-free, he thought to himself. The idea of revenge was becoming clear in his head. William knew he couldn't act without thinking. He was a general. He was a man who was used to planning operations very carefully. He thought about every detail before making an attack. Over the next few days, William began to make a plan using his army friends. He knew that he had the loyalty of many people who worked for him. These men and women respected him greatly. William called up a list of trusted people he knew in the army. He was a man who commanded respect. Many people who worked with him saw him not only as a boss, but also as a guide. The years he worked created strong bonds of friendship and loyalty. He knew who he could trust. William gave small tasks to each of them. He asked for information about Nicole. He wanted to know her schedule and routine. He also wanted to know where her children and mother were. He didn't tell them all the reasons why. The days after that were carefully investigated. Nicole was a doctor. She was a respected professional among the community. Her sons, David and Richard, studied at a very good private school. Her mother, who was older and frail, lived with her in a beautiful house in a wealthy neighborhood. Nicole's life seemed perfect, with a veneer of success and security. William knew that all people have their weaknesses. He was determined to find out what her weaknesses were. He gathered important information. He wrote down Nicole's working hours. He also wrote down her children's out-of-school activities. In addition, he recorded the days when her mother went out for a walk in the neighborhood. Every part was important. William couldn't do it wrong. The plan he was thinking of had to be perfect. There could be no room for error. On quiet evenings, while he analyzed the reports his team handed him, William focused on his goal. He felt many emotions inside him, but he managed to control them. Every choice had to be made calmly and thoughtfully, as in a military mission. Nicole had ruined his vacation. She had lost her peace of mind and also her trust in the system. Now he would do something she would never forget. He decided that the first step would be to strike an emotional blow. Nicole thought she had won the fight. She thought that the system had supported her and that she was protected from any revenge. William, however, was thinking of attacking what she loved most, her family. He knew that in order to destroy Nicole, he had to mess with what she loved most, her children and her mother. That would be the centerpiece of his plan. William, with the precision of a military strategist, orchestrated the capture of the three of them flawlessly. His soldiers, trained in special operations, would do the job discreetly, without leaving a trace. One day, the clock struck 4 p.m. when the blow was struck. The park, usually quiet at that time, seemed the perfect place to carry out the plan. A black car with tinted windows drove slowly up to the sidewalk where Nicole's mother and her children were walking. In a few seconds, the calm in the place was gone. From the car, two men wearing ordinary clothes but with a determined manner got out quickly and surely. David and Richard, who were further ahead, almost didn't realize what was happening. One of the soldiers grabbed the older boy while the other quickly grabbed the younger boy. The grandmother heard the messy cries of her grandchildren and tried to run to them, but soon someone stopped her. Her weak body couldn't withstand the strong pull of one of the kidnappers. He carried her to the car without hurting her, but very firmly. The children's cries of fear could be heard throughout the park, but the attack was so quick and silent that few people noticed what was happening until it was too late. In less than 2 minutes, Nicole's mother and her children were bundled into the car. The tires rumbled as the car sped off. It disappeared over the horizon. The street, which had once been quiet and familiar, now seemed full of fear and confusion among the few people who saw what had happened. They didn't have the time or courage to help. From a hilltop far away, William looked at the scene with his binoculars firmly in his hands. He didn't like making others suffer, but he felt a strong sense that he was doing the right thing. Nicole would pay that price for ruining his vacation, his pride, and his dignity. For him, this was the only way to regain his balance. The attack was precise, without using unnecessary violence. It was like a well-executed military operation. William knew that this was going to end Nicole's world. She could no longer control things. From that moment on, the game was in her hands. As the car drove away, Nicole didn't realize what was happening. She was focused on her activities at the hospital. She didn't know that soon, everything in her life would change. She would receive the call that would change her life forever. Then she would have to make a very difficult choice. Hours later, late at night, Nicole finally returned home. She was very tired after a long day at the hospital. When she realized that her mother and children weren't there, she began to feel strange. She tried calling her mother's cell phone, but the call went to voicemail. At first, she thought they were out of time or that her cell phone was dead. But as the minutes passed, she became more and more nervous. She paced back and forth, worried, thinking that something wasn't right. Suddenly, the phone started ringing. The noise of the handset, which was normal in her house, now sounded like a bad signal. Nicole answered the phone. On the other end of the line, a cold, controlled voice that she didn't know began to speak. "Nicole, we are with your mother and children. They're safe, for now." The voice showed no feelings. "But if you want to see them again, you'll have to follow our orders exactly." Nicole's heart stopped for a moment. Her body stiffened and her mind began to think with distress. Every word of that voice hurt her like a sharp knife. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. He felt a great emptiness in his chest. It was as if the ground beneath her feet was falling away. She was filled with panic. "What's your name? What do you want with my family?" she asked, her voice shaking as tears began to stream down her face. The answer was short and to the point. "I want justice to happen. You will tell what happened on that plane. You will publicly acknowledge that you committed racism and discrimination against William. You will also need to send $450,000 to an account that we will tell you about. If you do that, your mother and your children will come back to you. If you don't, well, you understand what can happen." Nicole said nothing. The phone almost slipped out of her trembling hands. When they heard William's name, their bodies went cold. All the memories of that day on the plane, the trial and his punishment came flooding back. She had belittled the man she thought she had beaten. Now he was taking his revenge in a very bad way. "How do I know they're okay?" Nicole managed to speak quietly. She wanted to think calmly, while her mind tried to understand what was going on. The voice on the phone gave her a weak smile before moving on. "They're happy, for now. You don't have much choice, Nicole. Either you do what we ask, or you won't see your family again." The call ended suddenly, leaving Nicole very frightened. She fell to the living room floor. She hugged her knees and cried a lot. Her mind was in turmoil, and she realized that, from that moment on, her life would change forever. William had turned her arrogance and her way of thinking she was better into a dangerous trap. Now there was no escaping that trap. Nicole had to decide soon. Nicole was very sad. She was sitting on the cold floor of the living room. The phone was still in her trembling hands. Her body was shaking from the words she had just heard. Fear gripped her. She was breathing fast and sobbing unintentionally. She tried to understand how her life had changed into a nightmare in just a few minutes. That moment of fear showed how fragile his life was. It was a sad situation for someone who, not long ago, thought he was better than everyone else and secure in his lucky position. Memories of what happened on the plane began to creep into his head. "I can't do this," she said softly, full of sadness, with tears still falling down her cheeks. The image of his children, who are small and vulnerable, and his mother, who is already weak because of her age, made him see everything more clearly again. It was no longer about vanity or preserving his good image. It was a very serious situation. Her affection for her family kept her going, even if the shame and regret were very heavy. Nicole understood that, in order to help the people she loved, she would have to give up something important. She stood up slowly. Then she went to her desk. On the table, she kept her money documents. Each step was difficult, as if her legs were carrying the weight of everything. Her hands were still shaking as she picked up her laptop. She began to move $450,000, which was the amount William had asked for. Every time she pressed a key, she had the feeling that she was selling part of herself. Money, which had always meant her freedom and victory, was now the solution to removing her family from their own sovereignty. When the transfer ended, Nicole breathed a sigh of relief. However, she didn't feel that she had won. In fact, the emptiness inside him seemed to have grown even greater. Now all that remained was to face the second part of William's request. She had to confess her crimes in public. She knew she had to go to the police station. This was the same place where, a few months earlier, she had been seen as the victim and William as the aggressor. Now people would show who they really were and the truth would come out. Nicole realized the irony. The place that used to show that he was better was now going to be the place where he would be shamed in front of others. Nicole, still unable to believe what had happened, grabbed her keys and drove to the police station. As she walked, her thoughts were confused and conflicted. She wanted to take care of her family, but the fear of losing everything she had achieved made her very anxious. But at the same time, she knew she had no other choice. When Nicole arrived at the police station, she was clearly upset. Her face was white, her eyes were swollen from crying, and her hands were shaking as she picked up the bag containing papers that no longer mattered. When she entered the building, she felt very ashamed. It seemed that everyone there knew what she was going to do. She walked up to the reception desk and, with a shaky voice, asked to speak to a police officer. When Nicole was called, she felt like the ground was shaking underneath her. It felt like reality was crashing in. He sat down in front of the officer and took a deep breath. He tried to gather the courage to say what needed to be said. I came here to tell you the truth." Her voice was low, almost like a whisper. "I told a lie about what happened on that plane with William. I acted in a racist way. I attacked him, and he only defended himself. The words came out with difficulty, as if they were hurting my very soul." The officer looked at her for a moment, astonished. The surprise was unexpected. He, like everyone else, had believed Nicole's story. She moved on, unable to stop the tears streaming down her face. "I did it because I thought I was better than him." Nicole cried as she spoke, the pain of recognizing her faults too strong. "But now, my family is at risk and I need to do the right thing." When she got back into the car, Nicole felt the chill of a night that was very cold. The $450,000 that came out of her account in a few minutes didn't worry her as much as the horrible feeling of not being able to do anything. All the money she had collected, which showed her success at work and her freedom, was now just a cry for help. The money that always brought you protection was turned into an emotionless negotiation. This negotiation was aimed at protecting her family from the problems caused by her own deceit. Nicole understood that, deep down, the real price she had to pay wasn't money. It was shame in front of everyone, a mark that would never come off her reputation. She felt like a person doing the wrong thing, something she had always been against. But what hurt most wasn't being punished. It was knowing that the punishment was fair. She had spent her whole life seeing herself as a better person than others. She thought she had the right to be in the highest place. Now that illusion was shattered. When Nicole arrived home, she found the place completely empty. The silence was so strong that it seemed to make a sound. His eyes looked around. They stopped at the family photos on the walls and shelves. The children were there, smiling and happy. His mother was always by his side. She had a loving gaze that helped you through all the difficult times. Now those faces seemed to come from somewhere else, from a distant reality that Nicole didn't know if she would ever live again. She walked slowly around the room. Her desperation was growing by the second. Nicole held the phone tightly. She looked at the screen. She was anxious for a message or a call to say that her family was okay. Finally, the phone shook in her hands and Nicole almost dropped it with anxiety. Her heart beating fast, she picked it up. Fear gripped her body. "Nicole," said the same calm voice on the other end of the line. "The transfer has arrived. Your statement has been written down. Now let's do what we need to do." Nicole wasn't sure if she was relieved or afraid. Her legs were shaking and she could hardly stand. "My family," he said quietly, almost without force. "They're going to be released. Don't worry." The answer came right away, but without feeling, as if it were just a piece of business of no personal importance to the person. "In an hour's time, your mother and children will be back. A car will take you to your house. After that, our task will be finished. Don't look for us. And remember, any attempt to denounce us or act against us will have consequences. Use this new opportunity." The call ended. Nicole fell to her knees on the floor. It seemed that all the tension in her body had made her faint. Hot tears streamed down her face as she cried. She felt a mixture of relief and despair. Her children and her mother would be safe, but the woman she had been until that moment had been lost forever. After about an hour, the sound of a car slowly pulling up outside made Nicole run to the window. Her heart almost stopped when she saw the black car standing on the corner. The back door of the car opened. She saw her mother and children getting out. They looked fine. They looked confused, but they weren't hurt. Nicole ran to the door. She opened the door quickly and went to her mother and children. Then she hugged everyone with as much strength as her delicate body could muster. Her eyes were full of tears that fell on her children's hair. She cried nonstop. She felt a little relieved and also guilty. Her mother looked into her daughter's eyes. She didn't understand everything that had happened, but she saw that her daughter was suffering. "Is everything all right now, Mom?" asked David, her eldest son, in a pure voice that made Nicole's heart ache. A few days later, a new hearing took place. When Nicole entered the courtroom, she felt that the air was heavy. It felt like it was hard to breathe. The judge looked at her and asked the question that would begin her confession. "Miss Nicole, are you ready to talk?" Nicole paused for a moment. She felt that the truth was heavy in her throat, but in the end, she confirmed it with a shake of her head. Her voice, when it came out, was strange and weak. The words seemed to hurt her throat as they came out. "Yes, I'm ready," she said, trying not to cry. She began to speak, her voice shaking. She told how it all began on the plane. She said that she had judged William only by the color of his skin. Her attitude, which was arrogant and full of prejudice, made her start fighting. Nicole said that instead of seeing William as a person, she decided to treat him as if he were less important. This caused a fight to break out. She said that the accusations she made against him, saying that he assaulted her, were false. The violence he used was just to control the situation and protect himself. Every word Nicole spoke made her feel like a piece of her soul was breaking off. She said that the court had been unfair to William. She also acknowledged that, with the help of people who shared her racial prejudice, she had altered the facts to look after her image. Tears began to stream down her face as she spoke, but Nicole didn't stop. She understood that she had to make the confession, even if it left her in a very difficult situation in front of everyone. I did it because I thought I had the right. I thought that the way I was and my color would allow me to act maliciously and not be punished. And that's what I did. I used prejudice and discrimination as tools. I did it without thinking." Her voice faded at the end. She put her hands to her face to hide her tears. The judge, showing no emotion, watched her every reaction. That moment wasn't just a legal step. It was the public downfall of a woman who had once felt powerful and invincible. After he had finished speaking, the judge looked at the officers who were there, and without beating about the bush, gave his decision. "Miss Nicole, after you have spoken the truth and thinking about the seriousness of the crimes committed, this court sends you to 6 years in prison for racial discrimination, lying and making false accusations." The judge said this as if it were a final and harsh decision. "In addition, you will have to pay a sum of money to Mr. William, as the law says." Nicole listened to what they said, but it seemed like she was far away. Her body was there, but her head no longer seemed to be in reality. 6 years. A phrase that might seem small to many people, but to her it was the end of everything she had ever known. Her job, her image, and her life with friends, everything was wasted. And what hurt the most, she knew that she deserved every part of this punishment. When the conversation ended, Nicole stood up slowly. She knew that her life was now in the hands of the justice she had tried to control. Nicole's mother, who has gray hair and is thin, held her children by the hand. She took them back home. She walked lightly, but also carried a weight that could not be seen. David, the eldest, looked around. He was restless and trying to understand what was happening. When he was 10, he already knew that something very bad had happened, but he couldn't fully understand how serious the situation was. Richard, who was younger and relied heavily on his brother, walked in silence. He held his grandmother's hand and looked scared, as if he expected something very bad to happen at any moment. "It's going to be all right," said his grandmother, even though she couldn't promise that. Her voice, calm and full of love, was the only comfort she could give at that moment. "When is Mom coming back?" asked David, his voice low and full of doubt. Grandma looked at him. She didn't know how to speak. She felt pain in her heart at seeing her grandchildren's innocence being spoiled by her own daughter's actions. "Soon, my dear. She just needs some time," said the grandmother, trying to smile even though she felt very sad inside. David accepted the answer without asking any questions. However, he still had many doubts in his mind. Richard, on the other hand, just curled up even more, seeking protection in the silence. The children somehow understood that something very bad had happened, but they still couldn't understand the whole truth. William felt a satisfaction, but it was a satisfaction without warmth, almost like a machine. He didn't smile or celebrate. He wasn't excited about his victory. There was just a thoughtful silence around him. He had gotten what he wanted. He had obtained not only Nicole's public confession, but also the $450,000. This was the money she had collected and which was now in a hidden bank account. This amount meant more to him than just a need for money. It wasn't about money. It was never about that. William wanted justice. He didn't get that justice through the legal system. But he, with his cleverness and strength, managed to make justice happen on his own. He got up from his chair and walked slowly to the window. He gazed far out at the horizon. The city was quiet, but inside the internal struggle was still going on. William went to his chair. He felt the fatigue of months of planning and emotional strain. Finally, that weariness weighed on him. He looked at the glass of whiskey he was holding and drank a lot, trying but failing to let go of the confused feelings inside him. "Justice has happened," he said to himself, as if to convince himself. "I did what needed to be done." The first few days in jail were very difficult. Nicole, who had always had a life full of comfort, now faced the difficult routine of a small cell. She had no privacy, and there was nothing luxurious there. The hard bed hurt her body. The constant noise of doors slamming and voices resounding in the corridors disturbed her already poor sleep. In prison, Nicole lost everything. She lost her freedom, her job, and, most importantly, her identity. Before, she was a respected doctor. She was a woman who felt in charge of her life. Her colleagues and friends admired her greatly. Now he was just a number like the other prisoners. He was someone everyone looked down on and judged. The pride she had always cherished was now gone. It was destroyed by the consequences of what she herself had done. Every phone call reminded her that she wasn't there. It reminded her that she didn't think she had been a good mother. It showed how very different her life was from what it had been before. "They miss you, Nicole." Her mother spoke, always looking tired but trying to stay calm. "We're trying to get everything back to the way it was, but it's not easy." Nicole listened with a sad heart. She knew that nothing she could say could fix what she had done. She could feel the sadness in her mother's voice. She thought about how her children would grow up with the pain of the kidnapping and of missing her. They were too young to understand everything that had happened, but they could see the effect. "I'm sorry, Mom," Nicole said, repeating the same words of regret, not knowing if she would ever be forgiven. "I'm sorry for everything." "I know, my dear," her mother replied affectionately but seemed distant, as if she too was trying to understand everything that had happened. As time went by, Nicole began to wonder if she would ever be able to forgive herself. She wondered if she could rebuild her life. The journey would be long and full of difficulties, She understood that the woman she had been in the past, proud and unaware of her advantages, no longer existed. What was left now was a damaged person. But maybe, just maybe, this person had the chance to start again. She could be more humble and realize her mistakes. After everything that had happened in just a few days in William's life, he decided to enjoy his vacation. Costa Rica, with its beautiful landscapes, was the ideal place to make a fresh start. On the calm beaches of the Caribbean in Costa Rica, William spent his days with a peace that seemed strange. He was immersed in his thoughts and reflections. The time he spent on the beach, alone thinking, became a reflection on his life. He thought about the decisions he had made and what they had brought him. The yellow sunlight illuminating the horizon seemed to bring a little calm to the turmoil that was still raging in his head. But even with all the tranquil beauty, he knew that when he returned to his country, he couldn't escape the consequences of what he had done. But as the days off in Costa Rica went by, William noticed that the happiness he felt was fleeting. The justice he'd done for Nicole hadn't brought him the peace he'd wanted forever. He still felt the burden of having passed through barriers he never thought he would overcome. The photos of the kidnapping, the way Nicole was emotionally manipulated, and the way she used her power in the army to get what she wanted. All of this upset him in ways he hadn't expected. During this vacation, something surprising happened. General William's phone rang. He heard the voice of Colonel Mendez. His voice was serious, but you could tell he was nervous. He said, "I have some information that I need to tell you. Sad information." William's heart began to beat faster. He had already thought about this moment. He imagined that his attitudes might come back and bother him. However, hearing the real words was always more difficult than imagining the rumors in his head. "Speak up, Colonel," said William, his voice strong but a little more serious than usual. He paused, and the colonel seemed to think carefully about the words he was going to use. "We've received complete information about what you did with Nicole, the woman with whom you had that problem on the plane. There is evidence that you used your employees and the army to plan the kidnapping of her mother and children." The colonel's voice, which normally respected William, was now full of disappointment. "You know this is a major breach of army rules and the laws we promised to protect." "The group that takes care of the rules got together," said the colonel, his voice strong, but showing a little understanding, "and decided that, because of the seriousness of the problem, your behavior does not match the values that the army supports. The decision has been made and you have been expelled. You are officially out of the position of General of the Army." "I understand, Colonel." He said it with difficulty, as if it was hard for him to speak. "Thank you for letting me know." "William, I know this is complicated," said the colonel with a calmer manner. "Your career has been very good in many parts, but that mistake, it was a very serious mistake. If you need anything, I'm here to help, but—" He paused for a moment, knowing that his words of support seemed worthless. "Good luck, General. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Could you give me any more information or questions?" "William." The colonel ended the call. Now William was alone with the news he had just heard. He stood still for a few moments, still holding the phone. The reality of his fall had really hit him. The army, which had always been very important to him, had now become his enemy. He was no longer General William, the leader who was rigid, the man who commanded strength and respect. Now he was just William, a normal man, without his position and without his reason for living. He was alone, without a name, without a reason, and with a long road ahead of him to understand who he would be without the clothes he wore.